I've been plenty critical of the Sacramento Kings front office, but I'll give them this. They sure did a good job improving the depth of this Kings squad. Jake LaRavia shines in his debut. Jonas Valanciunas and Keon Ellis step up big as well as the Kings bench bails out the starters. And this new group gets their first win here inside of the Golden One Center over the New Orleans Pelicans. You are listening to Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all season long. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here tomorrow, in fact, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News, and I got to tell you, I thought this was going to be an ugly Locked On Kings podcast tonight based off of how horrendous the start was to the game for the Sacramento Kings. Kings beat the Pelicans 123-118. They're 2-0 against the Pelicans this season after losing to them 6 times last season. A lot to get to from this game, but let's start at the beginning. I don't know if you could start much worse than the way the Sacramento Kings started in this game. The starters, flat, disinterested. The offense, slow. The pace on offense was horrendous. Once again, the ball was not moving. It was getting extremely sticky. It looked no different than the Kings and Orlando Magic here in this building a couple of games ago. And remember, they had the Portland loss sandwiched in between that. You would think in their third game, even though they haven't had a practice together, they'd look a little more comfortable as a starting unit. Nope. That wasn't the case, at least to start this game. The offensive pace was awful. And then once again, defensively, the Sacramento Kings couldn't stop anybody, especially from three-point range. The Kings fell behind by 20 points early on in this game. Right? Kings fans were restless, frustrated. There were a few boos. It wasn't like the entire arena was booing this team, but there were some very disgruntled fans early on as it looked like, man, the continuation of this new era of Sacramento Kings basketball was just going to just be plagued by horrible defense and an underperforming team. The starting unit, we're told, oh, look at all this offense that this starting unit should bring to the table, and offensively they just were poor once again. Zion was feasting, right, getting whatever he wants, and yes, I use that choice of words intentionally. And the Pelicans started this game 5 of 5 from three-point range. And as we've talked about a lot over the last couple of episodes, three-point defense has been horrendous for the Sacramento Kings and a leading cause of so many losses so far this season. But then the bench came in. Specifically, Jake LaRavia came into the game, making not just his Golden One Center debut, but making his Sacramento Kings debut and wearing the number 33. Jake LaRavia came into the game, and it's fitting that he wore 33 because really in the first 33 seconds, Jake LaRavia got a steal, got a bucket in transition, and then knocked down a three, right? He exploded out of the gate, immediately woke this crowd up, gave them finally something to cheer about. Doug Christie almost, I'm not going to say he looked disgusted necessarily, but he almost looked like, all right, you know what? Starters, sit down, bench, go in, give us something. I need some kind of energy because this starting unit ain't doing it for me. And Jake LaRavia said, bet, I got you. And he came in, made an immediate impact, and of course, Kings fans responded very well to that. The Kings bench went on a 13-2 run. I say the Kings bench, it was their 3 or 4 bench players with Malik Monk, who was out there with them. But in reality, it was Trey Lyles, Jake LaRavia, Jonas Valanciunas, and Keon Ellis that really got things going for the Sacramento Kings. Malik Monk out there as well. But a 13-2 run. The Kings go from down 20 to just down 7 at the end of the first quarter, which is a tremendous improvement based off of where we were headed. And by the time we got to halftime, the Kings were still trailing at the half But the starters on average at halftime were minus 14, meaning the starters were on average being outscored by the Pelicans by 14 points. The Kings bench players on average were outscoring the Pelicans by 3.75, or basically 4 points against the Pelicans by halftime. So the bench was clearly the difference maker, getting the Kings back into this game. The Kings bench as a whole tonight outscored the Pelicans bench 31-20. I can't tell you the last time that the Kings had over 30 points of bench production. It's been a long time, and it certainly hasn't been very often over the course of this season. But a 31-20 bench advantage for the Sacramento Kings second unit. Keon Ellis was a plus 14 tonight. Jonas Valanciunas was a plus 18 tonight, and Jake LaRavia was a plus 9 tonight. Speaking of Jake LaRavia, the Kings will be facing a little bit of a dilemma when it comes to Jake LaRavia. Jake was not offered or did not have the fourth year of his rookie scale contract picked up by the Memphis Grizzlies, which means that he is only eligible to be paid 5.1, and I believe this number is correct. I got this number from James Ham of the Kings Beat. He does a phenomenal job breaking all this stuff down. You can go and check out his work on the Kings Beat. $5.1 million next year, and can only sign a maximum of a 2-year contract extension. Unfortunately, even though the Grizzlies made that decision, when the Kings traded for Jake, they inherited the repercussions of that decision, right? Normally, a lot of teams will exercise that option on the final year of a rookie scale contract, and then have the full restricted rights of the player going into their next contract. That's what you typically see. But when the teams intentionally do not pick up that last year of the contract, it's made to put in place so that, as far as I understand, it's put in place. It's a system put in place so that you can't jump the gun and pay pay players a lot of money early on their rookie scale contracts, right? So Jake LaRavia is only eligible to get $5.1 million from the Sacramento Kings next year. It can only be signed to a maximum of 2 years after this year, at least for his next deal, which means that if any other team offers him more money or a better contract, he's probably going to choose that one. So the better Jake LaRavia plays, the better it is for the Sacramento Kings short term, of course, but the more likely it is that the Kings will lose Jake LaRavia at the end of the year. Just something to keep in mind. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. That's just the reality of the situation. So the bench gets the Kings back into this game, and then the starters wake up and recognize how unacceptable that start to the first quarter was, and come out with a lot better energy and give us the third quarter. Give us the offensive explosion that we have been waiting for, right? Finally, the offense shows up. With this roster as stacked as they are with offensive talent, they gave us a 45-point third quarter, 45-22, outscoring the Pelicans to where I believe they led by 9 points at the end of that quarter. So from down 20 to up 9 over the course of a couple of quarters. A great comeback for the Sacramento Kings. Malik Monk, Zach LaVine, and Keegan Murray all had 10 points in that third quarter. The Kings had 11 fast break points in the quarter and only turned the ball over one time. They were playing with pace, getting out in transition. Of course, it really helps that the Pelicans were finally missing shots because the Kings' defensive intensity did pick up. The Pelicans were just 1 of 8 from 3-point range in the third quarter. The Kings scored 10 points off of 4 Pelicans turnovers in the third quarter. And that's a big change 3-point-wise for the Pelicans, considering they were 11 of 20 from 3 at halftime. So they finally cooled off. The Kings' 3-point defense picked up a little bit. They were getting out in transition. That helped them score in a flurry. You love to see it. It was a welcome sight. Now we'll ask this group to do what we've been asking the Sacramento Kings to do all season long. Start doing this and do these things when you're not in a huge deficit, right? Doug Christie talked about this after the game. If the Kings played the way they did in the third quarter throughout this game, the starters wouldn't have had to play in the fourth quarter. They would have had a short night. The Kings would have had this game in hand. And the Kings did end up building an 18-point lead in the fourth quarter of this game. Now, they nearly gave it all back to the Pelicans, so they didn't do the best of job closing this game out when they had a significant lead. But the Kings would not have been close to that position if they had not fallen behind so big early on, to where when they go on a big run like this, when they have a massive 45-22 third quarter, it can put them in an insurmountable lead or put them so firmly in the driver's seat rather than only slightly in the driver's seat because of all the hole that they had to climb themselves out of earlier on in the game. So that's the next step. Now you've shown us that you can do it. You've shown us that you can give us this kind of offensive quarter, which the Kings are going to need a lot more of this if they're going to make the playoffs this season. Just do it before you fall behind by 20 points early on in the game. After the game, we spoke with both Jake LaRavia and Zach LaVine, two of the three new guys, who also got to light the beam together tonight, which is pretty cool. Their first beam, the three of them. And here you're going to hear Zach LaRavia talk about, actually an answer to my question, talking about like what this second unit can become as a group together. And then there's Zach LaVine talking about the starters' poor start to this game and how they corrected things to start the third quarter. Jake, I know it's just your first game with them, but yourself, Jonas, Keon, what do you think that second unit is capable of as a whole?
Kind of what we just did tonight, where that spark off the bench, if the starting unit, comes out maybe a little bit flat, maybe a little bit slow, or not, whether, regardless of how that starting unit comes out, I think this is a good bench to just come out there and bring that spark and defensively and offensively just keep things flowing.
We didn't do a good job in the first unit to start the game. So to come out in the third quarter, those are some of the biggest moments to set the standard. And pretty much, flip the script on them. And I think we did a really good job of that, being more physical, getting downhill, and, you get stops, that's a lot easier.
We, of course, also spoke to interim head coach Doug Christie after the game, and Doug talked about the fans embracing the new guys, embracing Valanciunas and Jake LaRavia specifically because of how hard they play. And Doug remembers that fondly, considering how they embraced him in his time as a Sacramento King for being the defensive workhorse.
Doug, I know you love the fans here, and you love the way the fans love the players here. To see these guys come in and just get huge ovations like right off the bat and be embraced like that, how good does that feel for you?
Man, it's these fans, man. You guys know what I want for them more than anything. If I could buy it, steal it, I would, because they deserve it. That's who they are. They support this team through the thick, thin, good, bad. They are here, and I respect that so much because through my time, I've seen a lot of different things when it comes to fan bases, and this fan base has continued to support, and I love them for it. And I think that what these guys are going to come to understand is when it's time to put the show on, they're going to support them in a way that creates a home court advantage that will run some teams out of here. But the one thing that they always need to feel is when they walk into this arena, they need to know that win or lose, they're going to play their hearts out. And that's all I ask from them. All the rest, we'll make shots, we'll miss shots, sometimes we'll turn it over. There'll be a lot of different things. But the one thing that is a non-negotiable is how hard and how competitive we need to be for these fans every night.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. What are some of your relationship green flags? We hear a lot about red flags that we should avoid, but what if we focus more on identifying the positive signs in our relationships? Those are the green flags. If you're not sure what they look like, therapy can help you identify them. You can actively practice them and even embody the green flag energy yourself, whether you're dating, married, building a friendship, or just working on yourself. Therapy can help you form relationships that love you back. Therapy helps you develop healthy boundaries and improves your communication skills. It empowers you to set clear expectations and express your needs in relationships. Therapy also provides tools for managing conflict in ways that strengthen your connections rather than break them down. BetterHelp makes it easy by offering online therapy with over 30,000 licensed therapists to choose from, and if you need to switch therapists, you can do so at any time for no extra cost. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. growing up a diehard fan of the Sacramento Kings and being a child of the glory era in the late 90s and early 2000s, I already love Doug Christie. Plus, I had the privilege of being able to work with the guy in Sacramento sports radio before he went to television and then went to coaching. But I respect the absolute hell out of Doug Christie for what he did tonight as an interim head coach. Before I get to that, I got to set the context for you. I talked a whole lot about the Kings bench in that first segment, but you notice I didn't really talk about Keon Ellis. That's not to disrespect the guy. Keon Ellis was phenomenal, but I made sure to save it for this segment because it leads to the conversation that I'm going to have about why I respect Doug Christie so much. Keon Ellis tonight was phenomenal. Just phenomenal. 13 points, 3 of 5 from three-point range, 4 rebounds, 3 steals. He was everywhere. He was on the floor for every little bit of good that the Sacramento Kings did tonight. The Kings get their ass kicked. The Kings get completely blown out tonight if Keon Ellis is not there to help them. He brings that energy. He brings that hustle. I mean, to give the Kings the lead after battling back from down 20, it was a Keon steal leading to an assist to Keegan Murray for a dunk in transition. Right? Keon Ellis is just unbelievable. He's so frequently on the floor whenever the Kings are doing anything good. His impact on winning is just undeniable at this point. Right? Whether it was the fun streak that we watched last year, which was really his blossom year of how many games the Sacramento Kings won, how many consecutive games the Kings won when Keon Ellis was in the starting lineup. At first I was kind of like, hey, look at this fun little coincidence. It's not a coincidence. Keon Ellis is a winning basketball player. He's proven it to us time and time and time and time again. I don't know what more, if you don't believe in Keon Ellis, I don't know what more you have to see. His story is awesome, and it should not be used against him. Just because he was a two-way player, just because he went undrafted does not mean that what is happening before your very eyes is not real. Doesn't mean that he has not blossomed at the perfect time to turn into this NBA player that directly impacts winning here in Sacramento. Like, Keon is legit. He's the real deal, and I totally understand all conversations or all takes or all beliefs from Kings fans to say, this guy needs to start. In fact, we'll get into that in just a little bit. But the reason why I respect the hell out of Doug tonight is Keon was rolling, right? Huge part of what the Sacramento Kings were doing all game long. Helped the Kings continue to build onto their lead and get it up to an 18-point lead there early in the fourth quarter. The Pelicans make their push, bring it back, got it back to within like 2 or 1 or something like that. So they nearly got this game right back. But Keon is out there, and he is a consistent part of everything the Kings are doing right. We get down to crunch time, the final few minutes, clutch time, right? Doug Christie keeps Keon Ellis in the game and has Malik Monk sitting. I spoke about this after the Portland game. I said I agree that Keon Ellis needs to be on the floor closing close games because of what he provides on the defensive end. But I thought having him in for Malik Monk would not have been the best decision because I don't know who creates enough offensively for the Kings with Malik Monk out of there. Like, Malik is the primary ball handler. He's the primary facilitator. He is the best guy for getting downhill and getting to the basket consistently and setting up his teammates. We got a pretty good chunk of that. We got a good glimpse. Now, over that time, the Pelicans were hanging around a little too close for comfort, and I will say offensively, the Kings did not look as smooth as they had looked at other times during this game when Malik Monk was on the floor. So I don't know if I'm a firm believer in Malik Monk has to be the guy to take a seat so Keon Ellis can be out there, whether it's in the starting lineup or coming off the bench in clutch time or whatever. I'm not the biggest believer that it has to be Malik Monk or it should be Malik Monk, even if a lot of people think that's the easiest one to replace. And then Malik Monk came back into the game, but not for Keon, for DeMar DeRozan. DeMar DeRozan sat down. Now, it ended up only being for like 1 or 2 possessions. Keon stayed out there. The Kings got to stop. And then I think the Pelicans called a timeout or something like that. And the Kings got the ball back on offense. Doug Christie subbed Debo back in for Keon. And Debo ended up hitting a pretty big mid-range jumper to give the Kings, I think, a 5-point lead late that helped them ultimately secure this victory. But I respect the hell out of Doug Christie for having Malik Monk on the bench for as long as he did. And I was watching Malik, right? There were a couple times where Malik got up and went to the table to check in and then was like stopped by Leandro Barbosa or another Kings assistant and told to go back and sit back down because Keon was cooking. Or actually, as you're going to hear Doug Christie talk about here in just a second, the plan was for Malik to come in and replace Debo earlier than he did because Doug did not want to take Keon Ellis out of the game. That's how much Keon was impacting winning. That is not an easy choice to make. It is not easy to tell Malik Monk, after everything that he's been through, being as a sixth man and fighting to get into the starting lineup, now that Fox is gone, it is not easy to tell Malik Monk, hey, you got to take a seat for Keon. It's sure as hell not easy to tell DeMar DeRozan in crunch time. That is his time. Hey, man, take a seat. Keon's got it going. We need Malik out there. I respect the hell out of Doug for that. That's not an easy thing to do at all, to tell guys like that they need to sit so that this young player on a pretty, I should say pretty, an extremely team-friendly, low-money contract, an undrafted player who was just a two-way player last season, to tell them to take a seat so he can be out there, that takes guts. That takes guts, and it requires a certain level of respect from the players to listen and embrace that. And I was watching Malik, I was watching DeMar during those moments. No, I can't read lips, and I couldn't see necessarily what they say, and obviously I couldn't hear what they say, but I was reading body language, and there was not any like pouting or frustration or what the hell, man, or F this guy. There was none of that, right? They recognized how important Keon was there, and then Doug ultimately went back to Debo when he felt that he needed to. I think that's it's a tough decision to make, but it was the right decision to make. And look, it might just be a circumstance, especially closing lineups, where like Debo didn't really have it tonight. I understand Doug might feel like it's DeMar DeRozan. He's one of the best closers in the league. We need to have him out there. But if it's a night where Debo doesn't really have it going, and Levine does, and Keon Ellis does, and Malik Monk does, let Debo be the guy. If Zach LaVine's having a bad night, have Zach LaVine be the one to take a seat. If Malik Monk's having a bad night, have him take a seat, right? If Keon Ellis helps you win basketball games, that's ultimately what is most important. But what about starting? This is a question that I actually have for you because I'm so on the fence with this. Would the Kings have fallen behind by 20 points if Keon Ellis were starting? It's kind of an unfair question because hindsight's 20/20 and we're talking speculation here. But we look at the games the Kings have won and how many games the Kings have won with Keon Ellis as a starter. Not to say that in every single one of those games the Kings didn't fall behind by deficits early on. But yes, I believe the Kings would have done a better job specifically defending the three to start this game if Keon Ellis were starting. But who do you start him for? Again, I don't think it can be Malik. It's not going to be Keegan, or I don't think it should be Keegan. Defensively, it doesn't make any sense. It's just a lateral defensive move. I don't think it's definitely not going to be Sabonis. But optically, can you get away with moving one of Levine or DeRozan to the bench? I don't know if Doug can do that. So maybe that's jumping the gun a little bit, talking about starting Keon Ellis. But it's certainly something to keep an eye on and discuss. So I want to hear from you. Do you think Keon Ellis needs to start? And if so, who is he starting for? Hit me up on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. And you can leave, of course, your answer and your thoughts in the comment section down below if you're watching on YouTube. While you're thinking it over, here is Doug Christie after the game talking about the decision to keep Keon in the game and who to replace and how those guys reacted to that decision. Doug, you talked pregame about it's a good problem to have, to find minutes for everybody. You were making sure to incorporate Keon there at the end, at times for Malik, at one point for DeRozan as well. Can you talk about that decision of when to implement him and the tough decision of who to take out?
Yeah, it's a tough decision, and they were being tough on me, which is like I love their competitive spirit. And when I took Debo out, I was just like, just give me one possession, put Malik in, and then got Debo right back in when they called a timeout. He comes out and hits a bucket. Like, he's one of our closers. Especially on the offensive end, we have to have him in the game, but we have to figure out how to make sure that we are getting stops and rebounding the basketball. Because the most important thing is we win the game, and they all want to win the game. But you are correct; like it's a good problem to have. It's one that I will relish, and from time to time they will get upset with me, and I understand that. I love them all, but I love winning most.
Just to kind of piggyback off what Matt was saying, for about 4:30, 3:30 left in the game. Looks like Malik came to the scores table a couple times and sat down.
Yeah.
Was the plan there for him to come in for Keon, or were you kind of just trying to scope it out at that moment?
No, he was coming in for Debo, but Debo made a shot. And, if Malik was in that position, Debo would be like, leave him in the game, because those are the type of guys that we got. They understand the game. When you start getting the game going, it's more about winning the game. So Malik was like, I'm good, D, and he went back. Now as that time started getting lower and lower, he's like, yo, and I get it. I love the competitive spirit that all of them bring. But that was kind of the rhythm of it, trying to see if he was going to get a game going. Once Debo got a game going, he's a closer of the highest regard, so we got to let him do his thing.
Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of Locked On Kings is brought to you by FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what is happening on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, yeah, that's icing on the cake if you ask me. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. So before the game started, with the Kings' three-point defensive struggles on the mind, I asked Doug Christie about that three-point defense. Now, unfortunately, I did not record my question. I did not record pregame at all, and I did not record Doug's answer, and I wish I did. Good lesson for next time. But I was reading off or reciting the numbers. The Kings being last in the NBA in three-pointers allowed per game, made three-pointers allowed per game. Second to last in overall opponent three-point percentage, right? And Doug, of course, wasn't too happy with me reading those numbers off, even if they're real, they're statistics. But I thought Doug gave a really, really good answer of, he recalls when he was in radio and then on the Kings broadcast team and then on the bench as an assistant, watching so many teams come through Sacramento and play the Sacramento Kings and just consistently knock down shots. He was like, man, why does this keep happening? And then he talked about the philosophy that he brings to the table. And I like the words. I hope the words can translate into action and the team can embrace these words. But Doug Christie's philosophy of how he wants the Sacramento Kings to improve their three-point defense is simple. Make them uncomfortable. Those are his words. Make them uncomfortable. Tonight, the Pelicans shot 14 of 36 from three-point range. That's 38.9%, so right around their averages. Not the Pelicans' averages, the Kings' defensive averages. The Pelicans shot 11 of 20 from three-point range in the first half. Much better job by the Kings in the second half. The Pelicans just 3 of 16 in the second half. But Doug Christie's philosophy, make them uncomfortable. He talked about pressing up on the catch, being there, having a man on when they catch so they can't get into their motion, right? Being so close, not to where you're like wrapping them up and fouling them or anything like that, but being in a position to where they are not able to get into their motion, into the rhythm and natural motion to shoot the basketball, right? Shooters are all about routine. That's why you hear Steph Curry took 1,000 threes today, and he took 100 threes every single day from different spots on the floor, right? These shooters have their motions. They have where they like the ball, and they have their motion of how they get it up. It's all rhythm. It's all muscle memory. By pressing up, playing on the catch, making them uncomfortable, making them feel like they cannot get into that motion comfortably, or they have to add a hitch to their shot, or after they have to lean a little bit or create a little bit of space, right? These are NBA players, the best in the world. Some of them can just figure it out and do it anyway. But if you can press up on shooters and make them as comfortable as possible, it limits the amount of time we're going to see these teams come in through here and guys like Trey Murphy tonight just go, or CJ McCollum, go crazy from three-point range like they always seem to do, right? If you press up, make them uncomfortable, don't allow those fluid motions, really make them feel you. That's what Doug says. And actually, Mike Brown said that a lot too. Make them feel you. Make sure that you are an established presence. You're not just always trying to close out on them and giving them a good look. Make them feel you. Be there when they catch the ball. Don't let them get comfortable. at any point. And that's the problem is I see so many teams come into the Golden One Center and they're comfortable and confident. Those two C's are everything for a shooter. If you're comfortable and you're confident, you're going to shoot lights out at the NBA level. And the Kings need to do a better job of doing that. I'm convinced personally that if the Kings just got to the 20th in the NBA in made threes allowed and opponent three-point percentage, it would be a drastic improvement towards them winning basketball games and hopefully making the play-in or the playoffs outright. Right? And the difference between 30th and 20th or 29th and 20th is not astronomical. It's not. Like the Kings, like I said, 30th in the NBA in made threes allowed by their opponent, 14.5. 20th is 13.7. Basically one fewer three made per game. 29th in the NBA in three-point percentage for the Kings, 37.7%. 20th is 36.5%. 1 percentage point less. Like, we're not talking about, oh my God, the Kings are so far out of it in the NBA. Not at all. But if they can just slightly hold their opponent to one less three per game, I'm not saying it's going to guarantee them wins every single night, but one less three per game, 1% worse three-point shooting-wise, it can make a drastic difference for the success of the Sacramento Kings, and it is achievable. So hopefully the Kings can pull it off. It's going to be a while until we see the Sacramento Kings in the Golden One Center again. I think it's like February 21st against the Golden State Warriors. That's the next time they have a home game. Right back onto the road. The Kings have a 3-game road trip before the All-Star break in San Francisco. 3 road games, first at Dallas against the Mavericks, and then back-to-back games in New Orleans against the Pelicans again. I don't care which team you beat. If you beat the Pelicans twice, if you beat the Pelicans once and the Mavericks once, whatever. Get me 2 of these games. Go out and get 2 of these games, go into the All-Star break 28 and 27, and then you're looking at some time off for, of course, the players to kind of relax, recoup, take care of their bodies, take a little bit of a much-needed breather. But also you get some practice time. You get some time for these guys to get on the floor together outside of just a shoot-around, really work on some things, really work on getting comfortable together, and hopefully that can give them the jolt that they need to really hit the ground running in this playoff race that's going to be very, very tight for the remainder of this season. So get me 2 of these next 3 road games before the All-Star break, and I'm feeling pretty good about where the Kings are at. And now you have a little bit of time to get more comfortable together and see if you can hit the ground running. I don't know where the Kings are going to end up. At this point, like, my gut tells me that this is probably a play-in team. If you can get to 7 or 8, though, and secure the opportunity to only have to win 1 game to get into the playoffs instead of 2. Because remember, even if the Kings are 9th, like they were last year, sure, they get that first home game. That's fun. But you have to win twice to get in. If you're finished 7th or 8th, 8th, you're on the road. That's a bummer. But if you win that game, you're the 7th seed. If you lose that game, you then host the winner of 9 or 10 to then get into the playoffs. So there's a big difference between 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. The Kings still very much can make a push and get into 6th. I'm not writing that off. I personally think this is a play-in team. 7 or 8 is the goal. That's what I'm looking at with this team at this point in time. If you're maybe that's too low of a bar, maybe that's not ambitious enough. That's where I'm at with this Kings group at this point. Where are you at? Where do you think the Kings will end up? You can share that with me as well. Appreciate your support. Can't wait to have you join me on the next episode of the Locked On Kings podcast. Until then, my name is Matt George. You've been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.